Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of Bailey Talk. I am your host for today, Jesus Bailey. And today's topic of discussion is going to be the Joe Biden Autopen scandal. We have all this news coming out about Joe Biden using an Autopen, which we probably already knew if you're based like me. You probably already know Joe Biden, and it doesn't even take someone who's based like myself to realize that Joe Biden was having a cognitive decline. And I wonder what it is that they did with Joe Biden, that he was having such a decline so rapidly during his term. He had no idea what was going on. They just led him to kids. They said, "Oh, look, Joe Biden, there's some kids. There's going to be kids there." And then meanwhile, they were signing pardons, they were signing executive orders, and doing all this nonsense. Well, Joe Biden had no idea he was behind the wheel. He was asleep behind the wheel, essentially. So we're going to get into the Joe Biden Autopen scandal. Right, guys. So the Joe Biden Autopen scandal is probably the biggest scandal in modern history among presidents. Joe Biden's Autopen, we all know he wasn't in control. Who was in control? Probably Barack Hussein Obama. Anyways, the alleged Autopen scandal during Joe Biden's presidency raises serious questions about transparency, accountability, and the integrity of executive power in the United States. At its core, this issue resolves around claims that Biden's staff use an Autopen, a mechanical device that replicates his signature, to sign thousands of official documents, including pardons and executive actions, potentially without his full knowledge or consent, which I believe that was happening. As a matter of fact, I can only assume that I know everyone knows that that's what was happening, was Joe Biden wasn't in control. They were signing things with the Autopen. Other people were signing things with the Autopen without Biden's knowledge when he was getting paraded around and guided by the Easter Bunny. When a president's signature, which carries the weight of constitutional authority, is applied without clear evidence of their direct involvement, it undermines public trust in governance. If these allegations are true, they could represent a significant breach of democratic principles, as unelected aides may have wielded executive power. Today we'll explore the facts, allegations, and implications of the Autopen controversy, arguing why those responsible for any misuse should be held accountable to preserve the rule of law and public confidence in our institutions. An Autopen is a device that mechanically reproduces a person's signature, used by presidents for decades to sign routine documents, especially when they are unavailable. Legal precedent, including a 2005 Justice Department memo, confirms that Autopen signatures are valid for official actions, such as signing bills, if authorized by the president. During his presidency, Biden used an Autopen to sign numerous documents, including a significant number of pardons and communications in his final weeks. Reports indicate that he granted clemency to nearly 4,000 federal convicts and issued preemptive pardons for politically prominent individuals, many signed via Autopen. Critics, including President Donald Trump and congressional Republicans, allege that Biden's aides used the Autopen to sign documents without his full awareness, potentially to conceal his alleged cognitive decline. Trump has called this the biggest political scandal in American history, and I happen to agree with him, claiming unelected staffers effectively ran the executive branch, so meaning everyone else was playing president, and Biden was just the puppet in office. The controversy centers on high-profile pardons such as those for Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Mark Milley, and members of the January 6th committee, as well as mass commutations for non-violent offenders. Critics question whether Biden personally authorized these actions or if aides such as Chief of Staff Jeff Zients independently approved Autopen use. The New York Times reported that Biden's Chief of Staff Jeff Zients emailed aides on January 19, 2025, approving Autopen use for pardons, raising questions about whether Biden directly authorized each decision. The White House counsel's office is reviewing over 27,000 documents from the National Archives to investigate Autopen use, suggesting significant scrutiny. Some ex-posts like those from @GOP Oversight claim that Biden aides issued executive actions without clear presidential approval, pointing to a potential cover-up. Biden has vehemently denied these claims, stating in a New York Times interview, quote, "I made every decision," and explaining that the Autopen was used due to the volume of clemency actions. He and his aides assert that he approved the criteria for categorical pardons even if he didn't review each individual case. While the lack of concrete evidence weakens some claims, the scale of Autopen use and the rushed nature of Biden's end-of-term pardons, some including controversial figures, fuel legitimate concerns about transparency and decision-making processes. The president is elected to exercise executive authority, not unelected aides. If aides use the Autopen without Biden's explicit approval, they effectively usurped constitutional power, violating the principle that the electorate's choice must govern. The perception that a president's signature was applied without their knowledge creates a crisis of confidence. Voters expect the person they elected to make critical decisions, especially on issues like pardons, which can alter justice outcomes for thousands. If aides acted without authorization, it could constitute a form of fraud or abuse of power, as suggested by constitutional scholar Randy Barnett, who called it a constitutional scandal. The inclusion of controversial figures like Mike O'Connor, a judge who took bribes in mass commutations, highlights flaws in the rushed process, potentially warranting scrutiny of those who designed it. Failing to investigate and hold accountable those responsible risks normalizing the unchecked delegation of presidential power. This could set a dangerous precedent, allowing future administrations to bypass accountability under the guise of routine Autopen use. The Justice Department, White House counsel's office, and congressional committees are probing these allegations, with some Biden aides invoking the Fifth Amendment, which, while a legal right, fuels suspicions of wrongdoing. They're all pleading the Fifth. So all the people from the Biden administration getting called in are all pleading the Fifth, meaning they don't want to admit guilt. They're showing the guilt, but they don't want to admit the guilt because they're staying silent. Justice demands that any misuse of executive authority be thoroughly investigated. If evidence emerges that aides acted independently, they should face legal consequences, such as charges for unauthorized actions or perjury to deter future abuses. The Justice Department and Congress must continue their reviews, ensuring all findings are made public to restore trust. This includes releasing relevant documents and testimony from aides like Annie, I'm going to butcher that, Tomasini, and Anthony Bernal. If evidence shows unauthorized use of the Autopen, those responsible should face charges, potentially for fraud or abuse of power, depending on the findings. That's a really big deal, too. This is all big deal. This is big stuff. Acting on behalf of the president and signing while he's, doesn't even know what's going on. He's go out getting ice cream or out sniffing kids. And they're over here signing his documents for him. Congress should consider laws clarifying the use of Autopens for high-stakes actions like pardons, requiring documented presidential approval to prevent future controversies. The media and public must demand transparency to ensure that executive power remains with the elected president and not unelected staff. The Biden Autopen scandal, while not fully substantiated, raises critical questions about who wielded executive power during his presidency. The use of an Autopen for thousands of pardons, combined with allegations of cognitive decline, suggest a potential breach of democratic trust that cannot be ignored. To uphold the rule of law and protect our democracy must demand a thorough, transparent investigation. Those found to have misused the Autopen or acted without presidential authority should face justice, ensuring that the will of the American people, expressed through their elected leader, remains paramount. That's why President Trump is doing what he's doing. As citizens, we must remain vigilant, holding our leaders accountable to prevent the erosion of the constitutional principles that define our nation. The Autopen scandal is a reminder that power must always be exercised with transparency and integrity.